innocent. I ain't killed nobody, never did ever kill nobody. They don't have no evidence against me. Came and put me in Las Vegas.
That was Keith D begging for his life, the exact moment he realized karma had finally come to collect. But who could believe him now? This is the same man who went on a worldwide book tour bragging about how he did it, even claiming Diddy still owed him money for the hit. And now, suddenly, he's the victim. Okay, what's really happening is that Keith D is finally realizing he was never built for that life. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly who put the fear of God in this man.
God got my back. God will see me through this.
I'm innocent. Keith D finally speaks from behind bars, and the world doesn't buy it. The man accused of orchestrating one of the most infamous killings in music history has finally spoken, and no one is convinced. Nearly 30 years after Tupac Shakur was gunned down on a Las Vegas strip, Dwayne Keith D. Davis looked into an ABC News camera and insisted that the system had it all wrong.
I'm innocent. I ain't killed nobody, never did ever kill nobody. They don't have no evidence against me. Came and put me in Las Vegas.
For a man who once bragged about being inside the white Cadillac that riddled Tupac's BMW with bullets, hearing him now plead, "I'm innocent," felt almost surreal, like watching a ghost try to rewrite his own haunting. He swore he was in Los Angeles that night, 300 miles from Vegas, and that prosecutors had framed him on words he didn't even write. His 2019 memoir, Compton Street Legend, the one that helped reopen the case, he now claims wasn't really his. "They fed me information," he told ABC, claiming the police and ghostwriters twisted his story for profit, but the internet wasn't buying it. Within hours, fans and former associates called it the most ironic interview in hip-hop history. A man who spent years bragging about the killing now playing the victim. Even Napoleon, one of Tupac's closest friends from the Outlaws, said the same thing many were thinking. Keith D's own mouth was his downfall.
I feel like he told on himself. He put himself in that situation.
Napoleon called it disrespectful, saying Keith's interviews had mocked Pac's death like it was a game for clicks. In his words, he made a joke like Pac was breakdancing. He took the likes more precious than his freedom. The contradiction is almost cinematic. In one clip, Keith D tells Vlad TV how the bullets flew and how Orlando Anderson leaned out the window to fire at Pac and Suge Knight, his voice steady, his tone cold, even proud.
So Orlando shot across Dre?
He leaned over on the window, we rolled down the window, pop.
Yet now, from behind bars, that same man tells a different story, that he was never there at all. It's a whiplash of guilt and denial. In 2019, he was selling books about the murder. By 2025, he's begging the world to believe he was framed. According to his latest defense, he wasn't even in Las Vegas that night. He was in Compton. He now points the finger at Reggie Wright Jr., a former Compton police officer and death row security chief once accused in conspiracy theories around both Tupac and Biggie's murders. Keith claims Wright orchestrated the whole thing, but Wright flatly denies it. For investigators, the timing of Keith's U-turn could not be worse. He faces a 2026 trial and a 16 to 40-month sentence for a jail fight that already has him labeled a problem inmate. And sources inside the Clark County Detention Center say he's terrified his own old associates. The same Southside Compton Crips he once represented might turn on him. Those rumors blew up after Napoleon remarked that Keith's behavior had crossed a line the streets would never forgive. "You from the streets? You take that and keep your mouth shut," he said, calling Keith's post-immunity interviews a death wish for clout. The streets agree. Inside gang culture, boasting about a high-profile murder, especially one as culturally sacred as Tupac's, is seen as a betrayal of both the code and the community. Keith's own words turned him into a marked man. Even Suge Knight, who was shot in the same attack and has never been charged, has publicly implied that Keith's stories don't add up. In his 1996 MTV interview a week after Tupac's death, Knight called Pac a man the whole time and said Pac was joking on the way to the hospital. Proof Knight believes Pac fought to the end, not ducked for cover.
Pac looked at me and said, "You know what? You need the doctor more than me. You the one shot in your head." And we laughed the whole time going to find our way to the hospital. That's the conversation we had.
Knight still has never implicated Keith D directly, but the tension between their versions of events has only deepened since Keith's arrest. And then there's the billion-dollar question that won't go away. What about Diddy? In his memoir and several interviews, Keith claimed that Sean Diddy Combs offered him $1 million to handle Tupac and Suge Knight, a claim Combs has always called nonsense.
We don't talk about things that are nonsense. We don't even entertain nonsense, my brother.
Still, that claim has followed Combs for years, partly because it fits the dark mythology surrounding the East-West Coast rivalry. For fans, it's a narrative that just won't die. The idea that money, power, and ego ignited the bloodiest moment in hip-hop history. Now, as Keith D faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars, the story he once sold for profit has become his own curse. He's no longer the laughing, bragging old head on YouTube interviews. 61-year-old man sitting in a Nevada cell, pleading for his life and his version of truth. As he told ABC, "I shouldn't have said nothing. I'm innocent, man." But to the millions who've heard him say the exact opposite on camera, those words ring hollow. Because in the court of public opinion, Keith D is already convicted, not by evidence, but by his own mouth. And the most shocking part, this is only the beginning of his confession turning against him. In part 2, we go inside the fear, the letters from jail, the pleas to old gang affiliates not to retaliate, and the new claims he made about who really killed Tupac Shakur. The irony runs deeper than a headline, because if Keith D's claim of innocence were even remotely true, it would mean that every interview, every Vlad TV segment, every Netflix documentary that ever quoted him describing the shooting was either coerced or fabricated. Yet those clips exist. His face, his voice, his timing. And they paint a picture of a man who couldn't resist telling a story the streets were supposed to bury. In one of the most circulated interviews ever recorded about the case, Keith D described the moment the white Cadillac pulled up beside Tupac's BMW. His details were surgical. The intersection, the gun, the way Pac was hanging out the window like he was in a parade, his hand reaching down as if grabbing something from under the seat.
He's coming up from me going, got to the light. He was going to go drink and smoke some weed, and he happened to be hanging out the window. He's hanging out the window like he was in a parade.
Tupac.
Yeah, he was.
So what happens next?
And we just came, and I ain't gonna go into details like that.
Those aren't the words of a man who wasn't there. Those are the recollections of someone inside the moving vehicle. And that's exactly why prosecutors pounced. In their 2023 indictment, Clark County authorities cited his televised interviews and book passages as self-incrimination, not hearsay. To them, Keith's story wasn't bravado, it was evidence. Yet now, Keith wants to recast it as Hollywood fiction. He claims the LAPD's Greg Kading and other investigators fed him details during an old proffer agreement, the same agreement that gave him temporary immunity when he first admitted to being in the car. But according to journalist Choke No Joke, who spent years tracing that paper trail, Keith wasn't exactly fed information. He was bargaining for his freedom.
So, Keith D gives an involuntary statement about the Tupac situation being coached by Greg Kading, who already got the story from Reggie, allegedly.
That's where everything imploded, because once that proffer expired, every boast Keith made on camera became fair game, a legal boomerang. As Napoleon put it bluntly, he risked his own freedom just to get a little bit of that dopamine rush. The result? A cultural circus. Documentaries began framing Keith D as the last living witness. Podcasts dissected every pause in his sentences, trying to decode who actually fired the gun, Orlando Anderson, Big Dre, or someone else entirely. Meanwhile, the families of Tupac and Anderson have been forced to relive their grief through a man who can't decide if he's a criminal mastermind or a wrongly accused senior citizen. Even Suge Knight from his own prison cell has reportedly mocked Keith's inconsistencies, telling journalists that people who weren't even there are now telling the story. And while Suge has always defended Pac as a man the whole time, he has never once backed up Keith's latest claim that he was hundreds of miles away from the crime scene. Still, Keith is playing to the court of public opinion. In his ABC segment, he shifted from the cocky tone of past years to a pleading voice. "I'm being held against my will. God got my back, and he'll see me through this." It was a moment that felt less like a defense and more like a prayer from a man who knows he's running out of time. And maybe he is, because behind bars, Keith is reportedly a lonely figure, too famous for protective custody and too hated for general population. Rumors circulate that even his own affiliates, the same Southside Compton Crips who once embraced him, have distanced themselves. To them, his TV appearances and podcast brags crossed a sacred line in street ethics. In that world, talking too much is a greater sin than murder itself. What makes the story even more twisted is how the system keeps looping the same names. Reggie Wright Jr., the security chief Keith now accuses, was already at the center of Russell Poole's LAPD corruption theories 2 decades ago. Choke No Joke and other investigators say Wright's role was misrepresented to deflect from the real motive, that the shooting was personal, not corporate. But after so many deaths and decades of silence, the truth is like smoke in a Vegas wind, visible for a moment, then gone. Yet no amount of revisionism can erase the fact that Tupac Shakur was only 25 when those bullets hit. 6 days later, he died in a hospital room with his mother by his side. And for the first time in hip-hop history, a generation realized that their heroes weren't immortal. They were targets. That's why this trial matters so much now. Not because it will solve the mystery. It won't. But because it forces the industry to face how its own myth-making turned a cold-blooded murder into a commodity. Keith D sold his version of that night for clicks and royalties. Now he's trying to buy his freedom with a different story. But in the eyes of the public, he has already lost the one thing he can never get back: credibility. Because when you spend years profiting off a legend's death, death, you can't suddenly claim you're the innocent one once the cameras turn on. And as Napoleon said best, you don't mock a dead man for clout. The streets will always get the last word. So when the lights go out each night in that Nevada jail, the same question hangs in the air that's haunted hip-hop for decades. If Keef D didn't kill Tupac, then why does he sound so much like a man who did? And the answer, whatever it is, might be the very thing that keeps him alive or gets him killed before his trial ever begins. Because in his own words, once you talk about what really happened on Flamingo Road, you keep the streets on you. Part 2, Don't Let Them Kill Me. Inside Keef D's jailhouse, panic and the fallout from his own words. When the ABC News cameras shut off and the studio lights faded, Dwayne Keef D. Davis was left in the one place no gangster ever wants to be, a cell surrounded by men who grew up idolizing the very artist he's accused of murdering. In the outside world, Keef D. was a talk show legend, a swaggering storyteller selling memories of the most notorious night in hip-hop. Inside, he's just another inmate with a bounty on his head. According to officers familiar with his confinement, he's been housed under separation status, not out of celebrity privilege, but for his own protection. Because word spread fast, the man who claimed to orchestrate Tupac's death was now eating state food beside gang members who grew up shouting Machiavelli forever. And what's worse, many of them once called him uncle. For years, Keef bragged that his Southside Compton Crips ties made him untouchable, but those old alliances turned brittle the moment he started naming names. Every interview, every offhand boast about who fired the gun, who was in the car, who gave the order, each one was another nail in his own coffin. As one former associate told The Sun, he broke the code, man. When you talk that much, you write your own death warrant. By early 2025, reports from the Clark County Detention Center described Keef as anxious, withdrawn, and constantly requesting relocation. His attorneys tried to spin it as medical, stress, blood pressure, age, but privately, those who've spoken to him say it's fear, pure fear. He's terrified that someone, maybe even from his own set, will make a name for themselves by silencing him before trial. The irony of it all is Shakespearean. A man who once mocked Tupac's final moments now lives under the same paranoia Pac rapped about in Me Against the World. Even his words in the ABC interview sound different when replayed under that light.
Being held against my will, I'm supposed to be out there enjoying my twilight. God got my back, and God will see me through this.
To the audience, it sounded like self-pity. To those on the inside, it was a coded plea. Don't let them kill me. Even Napoleon interpreted it that way. In his own reaction video, the former Outlaws member said Keef brought that on himself, but he also recognized the terror underneath. He's 60 years old, man, Napoleon said. At that age, you're supposed to be holding grandkids, not holding on to lies. And it's true. Keef's story keeps changing with every new audience. In 2018, he was the fearless insider talking to Vlad about revenge and street justice. In 2019, he was an author selling memoirs about the same shooting. By 2025, he was a trembling inmate claiming he was never there. The evolution of that narrative, from gangster folklore to desperate self-preservation, reveals more than any confession could. It shows a man cornered by his own legend, but jail doesn't care about legends. Inside, men trade stories for cigarettes, and Keef's has become currency. The younger inmates whisper about the guy who killed Pac. Some respect it, most resent it, because for them, Tupac wasn't just another rapper. He was the soundtrack to survival. His songs raised them. His death symbolized every betrayal the streets ever dealt them. So when word spread that Keef was seeking protective custody, the laughter in the pods was loud. One guard recalled overhearing an inmate joke. "You better hope Pac's spirit don't got hands." Still, the danger isn't spiritual, it's practical. The Southside Crips and their affiliates have fractured since the 90s. Many of those younger sets want nothing to do with an elder who went on national television to recount who shot Pac. And for every old friend still loyal, there's another who views silencing Keef as an act of restoration, a way to prove that the code still matters. That's why, according to insiders close to his defense team, Keef began reaching out through intermediaries, messages intended for the streets, asking for understanding, maybe even forgiveness. The content of those letters isn't public, but their existence is whispered about by journalists following the case. They reportedly read less like threats and more like confessions. If true, that desperation mirrors what Napoleon warned about on camera. Social media fame is like a drug. He risked his freedom for likes. Now the come down has arrived, and it's happening inside a concrete detox center. Meanwhile, outside the walls, the cultural debate has shifted from "did he do it?" to "will he survive?" Comment sections on hip-hop forums read like countdown clocks, some predicting retribution, others calling for divine justice. One viral thread even quoted Suge Knight's 1996 MTV line, "Pac saved my life," contrasting it with Keef's current plea, "God got my back." The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone, but beyond the memes lies a darker conversation about loyalty and aging in the gang world. The old rules don't apply anymore. The same codes that once kept men silent have been eroded by podcasts, podcasts and cameras. Keith D became proof that even the streets aren't immune to the pull of virality. He turned a murder mystery into a streaming career. Choke No Joke, in his YouTube expose, argued that this was the inevitable endgame of that fame for truth cycle. Once you start letting cops film you, the streets ain't yours no more, he said, referring to Keith's 2018 dealings with LAPD investigator Greg Kading and the so-called proffer agreement that allowed him to speak freely. You already signed your life away. And that's what makes this new chapter feel final. There's no stage left to perform on. No interviewer willing to pay for recycled half-truths. The next time Keith D speaks publicly, it'll be in a courtroom, flanked by lawyers, cameras, and an audience hungry for closure. Prosecutors remain confident. They say they have his voice, his admissions, and enough corroborating testimony to secure a conviction. His defense, however, will lean on the same narrative he introduced in that ABC segment, that he was manipulated, exploited, and misquoted. The problem is that the jury will also hear those clips, his voice bragging, describing, laughing. There's no editor to blame for that. Still, somewhere beneath the bravado and fear, there's a glimpse of a man who realizes that every story he ever told has led to this one ending. The pride that once defined him has dissolved into self-preservation. The code he used to preach, don't talk, don't fold, has already been broken. In that sense, his greatest punishment isn't the sentence ahead, it's the knowledge that he authored his own downfall. Napoleon said it best. Pac wouldn't want him in jail. Pac would have handled it in the streets. But what Keith did, the bragging, the mocking, that's between him and God. And maybe that's the ultimate twist. Because as Keith sits in his cell praying that his old allies spare him, the man he helped destroy is still larger than life, immortalized on murals, quoted by presidents, taught in universities. Meanwhile, the only legacy Keith D has left is a courtroom date and a trail of contradictions. The final chapter, how Keith D's own words could convict him and rewrite hip-hop history. It's almost poetic that after 3 decades of speculation, betrayals, and endless documentaries, the man who spent years talking about Tupac Shakur's murder might finally be undone by his own mouth. When the trial opens in February 2026, the prosecution isn't expected to rely on new DNA evidence or long-lost witnesses. They're relying on something far more damning, Keith D himself. Every television segment, every podcast, every cocky retelling of that Las Vegas night will be played back to him in open court. For once, there will be no cuts, no edits, no book deal filter, just the raw sound of a man narrating a murder he now swears he didn't commit. It's an unprecedented case. Rarely does a murder prosecution hinge not on forensic proof, but on a suspect's public ego. But that's exactly what prosecutors intend to prove, that Keith D confessed in plain sight long before he was ever indicted. Their case is simple and devastating. They'll show jurors how, in interviews and in his 2019 memoir, Compton Street Legend, Keith repeatedly placed himself inside the white Cadillac, naming everyone in the car except the shooter by name. They'll play the moment he told Vlad TV.
Started shooting at Tupac and Suge.
Lane starts blasting. You say Suge looks over, he sees you.
Then they'll follow it with the clip from his ABC interview nearly 6 years later, where he claims he was 300 miles away and never killed anyone. 2 conflicting stories, both in his own voice. And that's the heart of the trial. Not whether there's new forensic evidence, but whether jurors believe Keith D's 2023 humility or his 2018 bravado. Prosecutors will argue he only changed his story when his clout ran out. Defense attorneys will say he was coerced, misquoted, manipulated for fame and ratings. But the videos don't lie. And in the digital age, jurors will have already seen them long before stepping into court. That's the danger of being your own myth maker. For Las Vegas prosecutors, this case is personal. They've been mocked for nearly 3 decades over the city's failure to solve Tupac's murder. The trial isn't just about one man. It's about redemption for an entire department that has lived under the shadow of incompetence. Inside their offices, the words "finally" and "closure" have been circulating since Keith's arrest. But whether that closure will hold depends on one thing: if they can convince the jury that talk is enough. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the media war has already begun. Every entertainment outlet from Rolling Stone to The Guardian has recycled the same headline: Tupac's killer finally faces justice. But the phrase itself is deceptive, because even if Keith D is convicted, the mystery isn't truly solved. The shooter, whether Orlando Anderson or DeAndre Big Dre Smith, is long dead. The alleged middlemen, Terrence T. Brown and Zip, are gone too. What's left is an old man claiming to be the scapegoat of history, and in a twisted way, he's not wrong. Ever since September 1996, every major figure linked to that night has either been murdered, imprisoned, or discredited. Orlando Anderson was shot in 1998. Yaki Gaddafi, one of the few eyewitnesses, was killed 2 months after Tupac. Suge Knight's empire collapsed under federal raids. Even Sean Diddy Combs, though never charged, has spent decades dodging the rumor that he put a bounty on Tupac's head, something he still calls nonsense. By contrast, Tupac, the one everyone said wouldn't live to see 30, became immortal. His murals stretch from Los Angeles to Lagos. His lyrics are quoted in courtrooms, classrooms, and protest marches. He remains the only one who never changed his story, because death locked it in place. And that's what makes this trial trial more than a legal proceeding. It's cultural reckoning for a generation that grew up believing thug life was gospel. The courtroom in Clark County is the altar where the myth of street immortality finally collapses, because the last man standing, the one who once sat in that Cadillac, isn't young, fearless, or untouchable. He's old, frail, and begging for mercy. That's the real tragedy. Even Napoleon, who once vowed never to celebrate Pac's killers being punished, has admitted that seeing Keith D deteriorate in jail is a sobering sight. Pac wouldn't want this, he said. He'd say that street stuff, let the streets handle it. But bragging about it, that's what cursed him. And maybe that's true, because if there's one theme running through this saga, it's how ego devours its own. It wasn't the cops who cracked this case, it was YouTube. It was a culture that couldn't stop asking questions until someone answered them for clout. Keith D saw that demand and filled it over and over until the story became his identity. Now, that identity is Exhibit A. What makes it even more ironic is that the people he once trusted, the ones who told his story, filmed his interviews, promoted his book, are now the ones subpoenaed to testify. Producers, journalists, and podcast hosts will have to take the stand to verify their own footage. The cameras that once made him famous will now testify against him. And if convicted, his sentence won't just mark the end of one man's freedom, it will close one of the darkest chapters in music history. But not everyone believes that closure means justice. Choke No Joke, who spent years dissecting the LAPD's mishandling of the original investigation, still argues that Reggie Wright Jr. had a larger hand in the chaos than anyone admits. In his breakdown, he reminded viewers that Wright was both a law enforcement officer and Death Row's head of security, a man who could move between badges and bloods. He even claimed that Wright's absence from the MGM Grand that night was too convenient. To the conspiracy crowd, Keef's arrest isn't justice, it's misdirection. To them, the real story is buried under 30 years of politics, money, and silence. But to the families, to those who lost loved ones in this cycle of revenge, the courtroom represents something simpler: acknowledgement that Tupac's life, however complex, mattered. When the trial begins, the atmosphere will be electric. Old Outlaws members plan to attend. Retired detectives will testify. Fans will camp outside just to glimpse the moment. History folds back on itself, and somewhere between the prosecution's evidence and Keef's latest plea for innocence, the truth will echo once more. The truth of a culture built on fame, betrayal, and survival. No matter the verdict, Keith D's words have already sealed his fate, because even if he walks free, he'll never escape the mythology he created. Every whisper, every quote, every freeze frame of him describing the shots will live online forever. In the age of digital memory, the streets don't forget, they replay. And somewhere beyond that courtroom, beyond the documentaries and the think pieces, a simple reality remains. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old. He believed his voice could outlast bullets. He was right. 3 decades later, the man who says he didn't do it is still being hunted by the story of the man who did everything. And as Keith D prepares to face the jury, the last words he once spoke, part denial, part confession, hang like prophecy. I shouldn't have said nothing, because in the end, silence might have been the only thing that could have saved him. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.